The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the narrow streets of the city into gray rivers of mud and broken reflections. People rushed past with umbrellas and hurried footsteps, eyes fixed forward, hearts closed against the cold. No one noticed the small boy standing near the bus stop, soaked to the skin, trembling as if the rain itself was shaking him apart. No one, except her. Anaya adjusted the thin shawl around her shoulders as she stepped out of the apartment building, where her mother worked as a maid. The smell of detergent still clung to her clothes. At 17, she was used to blending into the background, used to being unseen. Her mother always said, "Keep your head down. Anaya, the world isn't kind to girls like us." But Anaya couldn't look away from the boy. He was no older than 7 or 8, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his small hands red from the cold. His school bag lay at his feet, open and soggy, books ruined. He looked lost, not just in the city but in the world. She hesitated. They didn't have much. Sometimes they barely had enough. Her mother worked from dawn till night, scrubbing floors in homes that smelled of perfume and wealth. Anaya helped where she could, dreaming quietly of a future that felt impossibly far away. Getting involved could mean trouble. Everyone knew that. But the boy shivered again, his lips turning pale blue. Anaya took a breath and walked toward him. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly. The boy looked up, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, tears mixed with rain on his cheeks. He shook his head, unable to speak. "Where's your family?" she asked. I don't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I can't find my driver." Something twisted painfully in her chest. Without thinking, Anaya pulled off her shawl and wrapped it around his shoulders. It was thin and worn, but it was dry. The boy looked at her like she had handed him the world. "You're freezing," she said. "Come on, you can't stay here." She led him to the small tea stall nearby, barely sheltered by a rusted tin roof. The stall owner glanced at them with mild curiosity but said nothing. Anaya spent the little money she had on a cup of hot tea and a bun, pushing them toward the boy. "Drink slowly," she said. "It'll warm you up." As he drank, color slowly returned to his face. His hands stopped shaking. "My name is Aarav," he said after a moment. "I'm Anaya." She didn't ask questions about why a child like him, well-dressed despite the rain, shoes clearly expensive, was alone. She didn't ask because she knew what it felt like to be lost and afraid. Across the city, alarms were already being raised. Phones were ringing. Security teams were scrambling. But Anaya didn't know that. She didn't know that the small boy warming, his hands around a cracked glass cup, was the son of one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. All she knew was this: a child was cold, alone, and needed. The rain didn't let up. It pounded the city in relentless sheets, washing away the morning light and drenching everything in gray. Inside the small tea stall, the warmth from the kettle was comforting but fleeting. Anaya sat beside Aarav, drying his wet hair with the hem of her shawl. His small hands still trembled, but the tea had brought a fragile spark of life back to his cheeks. "Are you lost?" she asked softly, trying not to sound too forceful. "Do you know where your home is?" Aarav shook his head, his eyes wide and frightened. I don't remember the street. I was in the car and then it rained so hard. I got scared." Anaya nodded, understanding all too well the feeling of being alone and helpless. Her own life had been filled with fear and uncertainty, but she never let it stop her from helping others. "It's okay. You're safe here for now," she said. "We'll figure it out." A few moments passed in silence. The stall owner, an older man with kind eyes, wiped a cup and gave a small nod to Anaya, as if silently approving her kindness. Aarav sipped his tea slowly, finally allowing himself to relax. His small body still shook occasionally, but his fear was subsiding. "You must be hungry too," Anaya said, offering him the bun she had bought. Aarav took it hesitantly, then devoured it with a quiet intensity that made Anaya smile softly. He reminded her of children she had tutored sometimes. Children who were used to being ignored, yet still carried hope in their eyes. Outside, the storm continued, turning the streets into rivers of gray. Anaya glanced at the boy again. She knew she couldn't leave him alone in the rain. But she also knew her own family's small apartment was barely enough for her, mother and herself. Still, she made up her mind. "I'll take you somewhere safe," she said firmly. "Just for a little while, until we figure out who you belong to." Aarav's eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. He nodded slowly, trusting her in a way that children sometimes did with strangers who showed kindness. Anaya helped him up, wrapping her shawl tightly around both of them as they stepped out into the rain. The wet streets glistened under the dim morning light, reflecting the city's indifference, but she refused to let it reach them. As they walked toward her building, Anaya's mind raced. She had no idea who the boy was, but she couldn't ignore him. Not when he looked so small, so scared, so helpless. Somewhere far away, phones were ringing frantically in a high-rise apartment, and a group of well-dressed adults were panicking over a missing child. But Anaya didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that a child needed her. And for the first time that morning, Aarav felt hope, not because of his lost status, not because of the storm, but because someone had seen him, truly seen him, and had decided to care. For Anaya, this was just another ordinary day, but for Aarav, it was the start of a life-changing encounter. The walk back to Anaya's apartment was long and slow. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, but puddles still covered the uneven pavement. Aarav trudged beside her, his small shoes squelching with every step. He was quiet, still overwhelmed by the sudden whirlwind of events, the storm, the fear, and now, the unfamiliar girl who had become his protector. Anaya's apartment was on the 4th floor of an aging building in a quiet neighborhood. The walls were chipped, and the paint was faded. But it was home, a place that smelled faintly of soap, turmeric, and the faint tang of hard work. She led Aarav inside, taking off her damp shoes first, then helping him remove his soaked jacket. Her mother, Mira, was in the kitchen stirring a small pot of curry. When she saw Anaya with a soaked boy clinging to her arm, her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Anaya, who is this?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "This boy," Anaya said, her voice firm but calm. "He was lost in the rain. He's freezing. We need to help him." Mira hesitated for a moment. They barely had enough for themselves most days. But looking at the boy's trembling form, she softened. "All right," she said gently. "We'll give him some warmth. Let him rest for a while." Aarav sat on the small sofa, shivering slightly, while Anaya hurried to fetch dry towels and a spare blanket. She helped him change into dry clothes she had kept from her own wardrobe, a yazi, simple shirt and trousers, but clean and warm. The boy looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and awe. In that moment he felt safe, like he had been pulled from the storm into a place where kindness existed. After a few minutes he whispered, "Thank you." His voice was quiet, almost shy, but it carried a weight that made Anaya's chest ache. She nodded, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "Just rest for a while. We'll figure everything out together." Mira brought him a cup of warm milk, and Aarav sipped it slowly, still wide-eyed as he took in the small apartment. The furniture was sparse, but every corner spoke of care and love, the little touches that money could never buy. Anaya sat beside him, her own body tired from the rain and the walk, but her mind alert. She couldn't help but wonder why a child like him would be alone on the streets of the city. His clothes, despite being soaked, were expensive, his shoes almost new. There was something about him that didn't fit with the world she knew, a world of struggle, a family scraping by day to day. "Do you have a name?" she asked again gently. "Aarav," he repeated, this time with more confidence. "And I date?" "He's looking for me, I think." Anaya's heart tightened. Even without knowing who his father was, she understood the fear behind his words. She promised herself silently that no matter what, she wouldn't let him face that fear alone. As the rain finally eased outside, Anaya tucked him under the blanket and sat beside. Aarav dozed lightly under the warm blanket, his small body finally relaxing after hours of cold and fear. The soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint aroma of Mira's cooking created a sense of security he hadn't felt all day. Anaya sat nearby on the floor, leaning against the sofa, quietly thinking about what had just happened. The city outside was still wet, the streets gleaming under puddles reflecting dim streetlights. Anaya knew that sooner or later, someone would be looking for Aarav. She could feel it in her bones, the way he had appeared. Alone in the rain, so out of place. He wasn't just any lost child. There was something different about him. Her mother walked over, carrying a plate of bread and curry. "He's lucky you found him, Anaya," Mira said softly. "Most people would have walked past." Anaya shook her head. I just couldn't." She paused, her voice quieter now. "But what if someone comes looking for him and doesn't understand? What if they think we took him?" Mira sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we tell the truth. You did what was right. That's all that matters." Aarav stirred, blinking sleepily. I don't want to go back outside yet," he murmured. His voice was soft, almost afraid. "It's scary out there." Anaya smiled gently. "I know, but you're safe here. I promise." She reached out, lightly brushing his hair from his forehead. The boy's small hand grasped hers. holding on as if anchoring himself to this sudden island of comfort. The hours passed slowly. Anaya and Aarav talked quietly, sharing small stories about school, favorite foods, and silly games. It was strange how quickly a bond could form between two strangers, brought together by a storm. Anaya found herself laughing softly at his shy jokes, feeling a warmth in her chest she didn't often allow herself to feel. But as evening approached, a heavy unease settled over her. Aarav's eyes widened when she mentioned it. "Evening?" he asked, voice trembling. Does it get dark everywhere like this?" "Yes," Anaya said carefully. "But it's okay. We'll stay inside." Outside, the first faint glow of headlights appeared on the wet streets. Far away, in a high-rise apartment tower, a man in a tailored suit stood by a large window, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes were fixed on the street below, panic etched into his face. He didn't know it yet, but the boy he searched for was warm, safe, and cared for in a small apartment far from the chaos of wealth and expectation. Inside, Anaya didn't know that Aarav was no ordinary child. She didn't know that the very air she breathed, the small apartment she had called home, would soon be swept up in a storm of riches, power, and secrets. All she knew was simple. He was scared, and she had chosen to help him. And sometimes that choice, made quietly, without expectation of reward, was the start of a story that could change everything. Aarav yawned, curling slightly. Night had fully fallen, and the city's streets glistened under the reflection of streetlights on rain-soaked asphalt. Inside the small apartment, Anaya and Aarav had settled into a quiet routine. Aarav was tucked under the blanket, drawing comfort from the warmth and safety that seemed so foreign just hours ago. Anaya sat nearby, her eyes scanning the boy's peaceful face, and a strange thought crept into her mind. How could someone so small carry such fear and worry in just a few hours? The knock at the door startled her. She froze for a moment, heart pounding. At this hour, no one usually came calling. Aarav stirred beneath the blanket, his eyes blinking sleepily. Who is it?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Anaya whispered, creeping toward the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the knob. She peeked through the peephole and saw a man standing in the rain, soaked, with an expensive-looking coat clinging to his frame. His eyes scanned the building nervously, and there was a tension in the way he held himself, a mixture of panic and urgency. Before she could react, the man called out, his voice clear despite the rain. "Please, is there a child here?" "A boy, about 7, wearing wet clothes." I'm looking for him." Anaya's mind raced. She didn't know this man, but there was desperation in his voice that made her pause. He didn't seem threatening, just frantic. Aarav peeked out from under the blanket, eyes wide. He seemed to recognize the seriousness in the man's tone, though he didn't say a word. He's inside," Anaya finally said, her voice steady but cautious. "He was lost in the rain. He's safe." The man's expression softened slightly, though relief didn't fully replace the worry in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've been searching everywhere. I was afraid I'd lost him." Anaya hesitated. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. He looked wealthy, powerful, and out of place in this modest building. Still, she remembered her mother's words. "Do what is right." "Come in," she said quietly. "He's here. He's safe. Please, be gentle." The man stepped inside carefully, his eyes scanning the small apartment, taking in the modest furnishings, the worn walls, and finally, the boy curled under the blanket. Aarav's eyes met the man's, and for a moment, silence hung in the room. Then the boy's lips trembled. "Dad?" he whispered, hope and fear mixed in his voice. The man's eyes widened, and his entire body seemed to shift with recognition and disbelief. He dropped to his knees, reaching out for Aarav. "Aarav!" "Thank God. I thought I'd lost you forever." Anaya watched quietly from the side, a strange mix of relief and uncertainty filling her. She had helped a child, yes, but the moment felt bigger than anything she could have imagined. This was no ordinary lost boy. And as father and son embraced, Anaya realized that her small act. The man, tall, impeccably dressed, yet soaked from head to toe, kept his eyes fixed on Aarav as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He brushed back the boy's wet hair and held his small hands gently. "You're safe. You're really safe," he murmured, almost to himself. Aarav clung to him, feeling the warmth of his father's embrace and the relief that came from being found. Anaya watched from the corner of the room, her heart both heavy and light. Heavy because she had never imagined stepping into a world so different from her own, and light because she had helped someone, made a real difference. She hadn't expected recognition, Yet the gratitude in the man's eyes made her stomach twist with quiet pride. "I can't thank you enough," the man said finally. Turning toward Anaya, his voice was steady now, but his eyes shone with emotion. You saved my son. I don't even know your name, but I owe you everything." Anaya hesitated, feeling suddenly small. "I'm Anaya," she said softly. I just saw he needed help. I couldn't leave him out there." He nodded solemnly, as if her words confirmed something he had forgotten in the rush of wealth and power, that kindness existed beyond money. "Anaya, thank you," he repeated. But it sounded like he was saying far more than the words could hold. Aarav, still wrapped in the blanket, peeked at Anaya shyly. She helped me," he said softly. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The weight of relief, trust and admiration. The father smiled at his son, then looked back at Anaya. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "In my world we have everything, but sometimes we forget what really matters. You reminded me?" Anaya blushed, embarrassed by the attention. Helping people wasn't something she did for recognition. She did it because it was right. Yet seeing the man's gratitude, seeing how a single act of kindness could bridge two very different lives, filled her with an emotion she hadn't expected: hope. Mira, standing quietly in the kitchen doorway, smiled faintly. She could see the connection forming, subtle but powerful. Sometimes, she thought, the world surprised you in ways you didn't expect. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded in the small apartment. But inside, something had shifted. A simple act of compassion had connected strangers across divides of wealth, power and circumstance. Aarav yawned and leaned against his father, feeling safe for the first time in what felt like forever. Anaya tidied up the small apartment, careful not to make a fuss. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She only knew she had done what she could, and sometimes that was enough. The man watched her quietly, studying her kindness, her courage, the way she had acted without hesitation. He knew he couldn't repay her fully, not with money or influence. What she had given his son, what she had given him, was priceless. As the night deepened, Anaya. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Anaya's apartment. Aarav sat at the small kitchen table, eating the breakfast Mira had prepared, while his father, Mr. Kapoor, stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The contrast between the modest apartment and the skyline of glass and steel towers was striking. Yet he seemed almost distant, lost in thought. Anaya cleaned the counter quietly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. She knew the boy's father was wealthy, powerful, and probably used to commanding attention. But here, in the humblest of apartments, he was vulnerable, aware of the fragility of the life he had almost lost. Mr. Kapoor finally turned to her. "Anaya," he began, his voice measured, "I need to know more about you. How did you end up here? How did you know to help him?" Anaya hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I live here. My mother works as a maid in the city. I was coming back from helping her when I saw Aarav in the rain. I couldn't leave him." Her words were simple, but they carried honesty, humility, and courage. He nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. There was something about her quiet strength, the way she had acted without fear or expectation, that intrigued him. In his world, people often acted out of obligation, greed, or ambition. Anaya had acted out of pure compassion. Aarav looked between them nervously, sensing the tension in the air. He reached for his father's hand, holding it tightly. "He saved me," he whispered almost reverently. "She saved me, Dad." Mr. Kapoor's eyes softened, glancing at Anaya with a mix of admiration and wonder. "Yes, you did," he said gently. "And you saved him in ways you might not even realize." Anaya felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to praise, especially from someone like him. Yet it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt right. The morning passed quietly, with Aarav gradually regaining his energy and confidence. Mr. Kapoor asked a few questions about the neighborhood, the apartment, and Anaya's family. Each question was careful, polite, yet underlying it was an unspoken respect for her courage and integrity. Finally, Mr. Kapoor turned serious. "I need to make sure Aarav is safe. I also need to ensure that no harm comes to your family for helping him." Anaya shook her head. "We're fine. You don't need to worry about us." But he didn't leave it there. "No," he said firmly. "You've done something extraordinary. It's not just about Aarav. It's about who you are. You deserve to be recognized. And I want to make sure you and your family are protected." For a moment, Anaya's world, one defined by struggle, modesty, and caution, felt as if it had shifted entirely. She had acted out of instinct, but now her life and her family's were intertwined with someone whose world she could barely imagine. Aarav, oblivious to the complex web of wealth and responsibility that his father navigated. Smile. Days passed after Aarav's rescue, yet the memory of the storm lingered in Anaya's mind. Every time she glanced at the boy playing quietly in the small corner of her apartment, she remembered the fear in his eyes, the cold seeping into his bones, and the way he had clung to her shawl as if it were the only anchor in a chaotic world. Mr. Kapoor had insisted on keeping a close eye on Aarav, yet he trusted Anaya. He had asked questions, observed her actions, and recognized the kind of courage and integrity that money could never buy. "Anaya," he said one afternoon, "Aarav talks about you constantly. You've become a part of his life, and I want you to remain in it, if you'll let him." Anaya's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected such words. She had acted out of instinct, not ambition. The idea of being appreciated, or more, trusted by someone like Mr. Kapoor was overwhelming. I don't know what to say," she murmured, feeling both honored and anxious. "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. "Just continue being who you are. You've already done more than most could ever dream of." Aarav, overhearing the conversation, smiled shyly. Can she come to school with me tomorrow?" he asked, his small voice hopeful. Anaya laughed softly. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, ruffling his hair. "But I'll always be there for you." The apartment grew quiet again, the warm afternoon light spilling across the modest furniture. Anaya's thoughts drifted to her mother, Mira, and the sacrifices she had made over the years. Helping Aarav had been simple for her, yet the impact of that act had already rippled through multiple lives. Later that evening, Mr. Kapoor pulled Anaya aside. "I want to make sure you and your family are taken care of. You've shown a courage and heart that I rarely see. You deserve opportunities. If there's anything you need, education, safety support, I insist you accept it." Anaya felt a rush of conflicting emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a lingering shyness. I appreciate it," she said softly. I've always lived with what I have. I don't know how to accept more." "Consider it a small repayment for saving my son," he said, smiling faintly. "You didn't save him with expectation, but I want to ensure your family's future is safe because of it." As he left the apartment, Aarav tugged at Anaya's hand. "You're really amazing," he whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Anaya bent down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You don't have to think about that anymore. You're safe now, and we'll face everything together." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent as always. But inside the small apartment, bonds had formed that would last far longer than the storm. Anaya realized that her small act of courage had grown into a responsibility she could never have anticipated, one that would change not just her life, but Aarav's and perhaps the Kapoor family's world. The following morning was crisp and bright. The storm from days before had vanished, leaving streets glistening with sunlight reflecting off puddles. Aarav bounced around the apartment, full of energy, while Anaya quietly packed his small bag for school. The routine was simple, yet comforting. The bond they had formed in a single night of rain had grown into a quiet, unspoken partnership. "Are you nervous?" Anaya asked, adjusting the strap of Aarav's backpack. He shook his head. "A little," he admitted, "but I feel safer knowing you're helping me." Anaya smiled softly. "Then everything will be okay. Just remember to stay calm, and I'll be right here if you need me." Mr. Kapoor had already left for work, but his presence lingered in the apartment like a reassuring shadow. He had ensured that Anaya and her family were supported quietly, without making a spectacle of their situation. His trust in her judgment, her integrity, and her courage had made Anaya realize that sometimes the most powerful people respected heart more than wealth. As they walked through the streets toward school, Aarav clung slightly to Anaya's hand. He looked around nervously at the crowds of children, the honking cars and the hurried adults. Anaya's grip tightened gently. "Don't worry. Just take one step at a time," she whispered. At school, the familiar chaos of classrooms, playgrounds, and chatter surrounded them. Aarav's friends noticed the change in him immediately. He was calmer, more confident, yet still shy in the corners of his eyes. Anaya waited outside the school gates, watching him disappear into the crowd, her heart heavy but proud. On her way back, Anaya thought about the unexpected shift in her life. A single act of kindness had connected her to a world she had never known, a world of wealth, influence, and responsibility. Yet, it had also reminded her that the smallest gestures mattered more than power, status, or money. Back in the apartment, Mira watched Anaya quietly. "You've changed things for him," she said softly. "And you've changed something for yourself too." Anaya nodded. "I just did what anyone would do," she said, though inside she knew the truth. Not everyone would have stopped in the rain. Not everyone would have stayed with a scared, shivering child instead of walking past. She had done it because she couldn't do otherwise. That evening, Mr. Kapoor returned home unexpectedly early. Aarav ran into his arms, laughing with relief. Anaya watched, smiling from a distance, feeling the warmth of connection between father and son. She realized that her role in their lives wasn't about recognition. It was about trust, safety, and the simple power of compassion. "Thank you, Anaya," Aarav's father said quietly as he shook her hand later that evening. "For everything. You've taught us something important. Sometimes the bravest things are the smallest acts, unnoticed by the world, but monumental to those they touch." Anaya smiled softly, feeling. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, but one that carried a quiet transformation. Aarav returned to his routines, school, lessons, and play, but now with a newfound confidence that surprised everyone who knew him. His father, Mr. Kapoor, ensured that the boy's life was safe and enriched. But it was Anaya's presence, the gentle, steadfast care, that gave him a sense of stability no money could buy. Anaya's life, too, had begun to shift in subtle ways. She continued helping her mother at the apartments, but there was a new energy in her steps, a sense of purpose that had been awakened by the night of the storm. She had realized that her small acts could ripple into something larger, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, Mr. Kapoor invited Anaya and her mother to his office, not as a formality, but to acknowledge the impact she had made. The towering glass building felt intimidating, but Anaya walked in with quiet determination. Mira held her hand tightly, pride mixed with nervous anticipation. "Anaya," Mr. Kapoor began, his voice calm but firm. "What you did for Aarav, how you acted without hesitation, without expecting anything in return, is rare. And it's something that should not go unnoticed." He paused, studying her closely. "I want to ensure you and your family have opportunities you deserve. Education, safety, guidance. Anything you need, you will have it." Anaya's eyes widened. She had always dreamed of something better, but the reality of it was overwhelming. I don't know what to say," she whispered, a lump forming in her throat. "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. "Just continue being who you are. That is already remarkable enough." Later that evening, back at the apartment, Aarav ran to her and hugged her tightly. "See?" he said with a grin. "You're amazing. Even Dad says so." Anaya smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I didn't do it for that," she said softly, though her heart swelled with quiet joy. "I just wanted you to be safe." As the sun set, casting warm golden light across the modest apartment, Anaya felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The rain, the storm, and the fear of losing Aarav had passed. What remained was a life subtly changed, a bond forged in kindness, a family touched by courage, and the knowledge that one person's compassion could ripple far beyond what they could imagine. And somewhere deep inside, Anaya knew that her life, her future, and her family's world had shifted forever, not because of wealth, or power, or recognition, but because she had chosen to act with a brave heart when it mattered most. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but inside that small apartment, hearts had found a new direction. A bond had been formed, a life had been touched, and the echoes of a stormy night would resonate for years to come. The following evening, the small apartment was quiet, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has passed. Aarav sat cross-legged on the sofa, sketching little figures in his notebook while Anaya tidied the kitchen. Mira watched from the doorway, smiling softly at the bond that had grown between the two. Mr. Kapoor had been visiting frequently, quietly observing how Anaya cared for Aarav, how she brought calm and reassurance into his life. It was clear to him that the girl was extraordinary, not because of wealth, education, or connections, but because of her heart. Finally, he spoke. "Anaya," he said, his tone gentle but deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot about this. You've done more than anyone could have expected, not just for Aarav, but for all of us. You've shown courage and kindness that money can't buy." Anaya looked up, unsure of what he meant. I was just helping him," she murmured. "I didn't do anything special." He shook his head. "No, you did more than anyone could have imagined. That's why I want to make you an offer, one that could change your life." Aarav looked up, curious. "What kind of offer?" he asked, eyes wide. Mr. Kapoor took a deep breath. "I want you to stay close to Aarav, in whatever capacity you feel comfortable with. I want you to continue being part of his life, guiding him, supporting him. And I also want to help you and your family build a better future. Education, opportunities, anything you need. Anaya's heart raced. She had always dreamed of a better life. But this offer was beyond anything she had imagined. She glanced at her mother, whose eyes were filled with pride and hope. I don't know if I can accept something like that, Anaya said softly. We've always managed on our own. I've never been given anything. You've earned this, Mr. Kapoor said firmly. Not through wealth or status, but through your actions. And sometimes, the right thing to do is to accept help when it is offered. Not for yourself alone, but for those you love. Aarav placed a small hand on hers. Please, Anaya, he said softly. Stay with me. I feel safe with you. I don't want to go back to being scared. Anaya looked into his hopeful eyes and then at her mother, who nodded silently. Her heart swelled with warmth. She realized that helping Aarav had already changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Accepting this offer wasn't about pride. It was about ensuring safety, love, and a future full of possibilities. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said, her voice steady but soft. I'll stay. For Aarav and for my family. Mr. Kapoor smiled, relief and gratitude mingling in his gaze. You've made the right choice. This is just the beginning of growth, of trust, and of a life that's better because of your courage. As Aarav leaned against her, smiling, Anaya felt a sense of purpose she had never known. The storm was over, and now the real journey, the journey of trust, care, and hope, was only beginning. The months that followed were filled with quiet joy, growth, and unexpected opportunities. Anaya's life, once limited to a small apartment and long hours helping her mother, had expanded in ways she never imagined. With Mr. Kapoor's support, her mother no longer had to work double shifts, and Anaya was able to continue her education, something she had dreamed of for years but never had the chance to pursue. Aarav flourished. At school, he was no longer the timid, frightened boy who had shivered in the rain. His laughter was brighter, his confidence growing daily. Yet through it all, he never forgot Anaya, the girl who had stopped in the storm, who had cared when the world seemed indifferent, who had saved him without hesitation. One sunny afternoon, Mr. Kapoor invited Anaya and her mother to the Kapoor estate. The grandeur of the mansion was breathtaking. Yet Anaya's focus was on Aarav. The boy ran ahead, holding his father's hand, then paused to turn back to her with a wide smile. Come on, he shouted. You're part of this now too. Anaya laughed, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had never imagined being part of such a world. Yet here she was, not as a guest, but as a trusted part of Aarav's life. Mr. Kapoor approached her with a calm, proud expression. Anaya, he said, you've changed all of us. You reminded us of the value of kindness, courage, and integrity. I want you to know that whatever you choose to do with your life, you will always have our support. Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. I never expected any of this. I wanted to help Aarav. That's exactly why this is so meaningful, Mr. Kapoor replied gently. You acted without expectation. That's a rare and beautiful thing. And because of that, you've helped more than just my son. You've touched all of us. Aarav tugged at her sleeve and whispered, I'm glad you stayed with me. Anaya smiled and knelt down to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. And I'm glad I did, she said softly. We'll face everything together, Aarav, always. As they walked through the grand halls of the mansion, sunlight streaming through tall windows, Anaya realized something profound. Her act of kindness had created a ripple that changed not only Aarav's life but hers, and even the lives of those around them. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the quiet miracles happening inside a single mansion. But inside, hearts had been transformed, trust had been built, and a new beginning had begun for a girl who once simply stopped in the rain to help a lost child. For Anaya, Aarav, and the Kapoor family, the storm had passed. What remained was hope, love, and the knowledge that even the smallest act of courage and kindness could change everything. And so, a life once ordinary had blossomed into something extraordinary. A story of compassion, courage, and a bond that would endure far beyond the storm.